We have all heard stories from women who were about to get abortions, but they chose life. We've also heard stories from women who have had abortions and their road to redemption found in Jesus Christ. We've heard about pro-life ministries, pro-life activists, abortion doctors who have become pro-life, but rarely have we ever heard from people who have survived abortions themselves. Today on this episode of Amelia Proclaims Liberty, we are going to hear from Melissa Ohden, who survived an abortion. She is the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network and has testified before Congress multiple times about surviving an abortion. Please help me welcome Melissa Ohden to Amelia Proclaims Liberty.
We hear all this talk about women's rights, but I beg the question, where were my rights in the womb?
What does that mean for those of us that survive? We were someone else's choice. We were someone else's right. Our death was someone else's right.
You know, no child should have their hands left in the hands of their abortionist or a medical professional to somehow decide to provide them medical care.
I came out alive from an abortion procedure. But that is not supposed to be anybody's story. But this is my reason why I march.
Hello, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining Amelia Proclaims Liberty today.
Hey, thanks for joining, for letting me join you. It's been a long time since I last saw you.
Yes, absolutely. It was such a blessing meeting you when you were here in Charlotte. You were speaking at a pro-life event, and I was so moved by your story. It literally has the finger of God written all over it. You are the founder and CEO of Abortion Survivors Network. You've testified before Congress multiple times, and you've been featured on a lot of media, including Fox News and The Daily Wire and Live Action. And I'm so inspired by how you use your testimony. You don't shrink away from it and hide it, but you're using it to impact so many people. So if you could share with us what the story is for how you are doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. I mean, that's it. I don't think I can tell people enough that it's an encouragement for other people to affirm someone else who's using, God's goodness for good in the world. And I think that's something that the world needs. So I think that's really, that's one of your gifts that you're bringing to the world is through your own experiences and then raising the platforms of other people to say, you know what, there's good in this, and we should raise the voices of people who are affirming God's goodness. So I just want to acknowledge that with you. And
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, I don't think that anybody could have imagined nearly 49 years ago that a failed abortion would ultimately be used for God's great glory in this world. And that's what the story is. 49 years ago, my birth mother, as a 19-year-old college student, was forced to have a saline infusion abortion, which was the most common abortion procedure back then. And it had a higher incidence of abortion failure than people even talked about at the time. So back then, the CDC was saying, 300 to 400 live births a year after these types of abortions, which, historically wasn't too long after Roe versus Wade in and of itself. So I want people to sort of understand how long this has been happening. And so, yeah, that type of procedure involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the preborn baby in the womb. And that toxic salt solution was meant to end the baby's life. And so usually lasted about 3 days. The child would be essentially burned from the outside in, and then they would induce labor. And so, of course, the intention of that abortion was for the child to be delivered as a dead baby, right, in the final step of an abortion procedure. But that high incidence of failure led to what we now know in our world is a born alive infant, AKA, right, an abortion survivor, the baby who survived the abortion.
It's so hard to believe that a procedure like that would ever have been seen as any kind of medical procedure. It's so
Hmm.
barbaric, and all the abortion procedure methods are barbaric. But to think that you would inject a baby with a solution to kill it is just so beyond horrific.
Well, and I think that's, my kind of almost daily struggle, if I'm being honest, Amelia. Like,
Mm.
I was talking with friends last night about just some statistics, and I was kind of going, I know this is my lane, right? Like, I know this more than anybody else in the world, but it is so surreal to me. Yet, right, not surprising because abortion has impacted the world the way it has, but it's so surprising to me that there is data out there. We work really, really hard to highlight it. And yet, like, it's almost like people kind of put their fingers in their ears or they shade their eyes and they're like, do, this doesn't happen.
Mm.
This doesn't happen.
Right.
It happens, and it's still
Mm-hmm.
happening in the world today. And through dismemberment of babies, there was a study out of Canada that was showing an over 15% failure rate of D&Es. I mean, come on,
Wow.
15%. We're looking at over 11% of labor inductions for the purpose of the baby not surviving, right? That's abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Those were second trimester abortions in Canada, a sample of nearly 14,000. And these second trimester babies who supposedly had health issues that are incompatible with life survived those procedures.
Wow.
So for me, I mean, I think there is it really does lead me every single day to go, how did we get here? How do
Yeah.
we go forward, right? How do we open people's eyes and their ears and their hearts to this? Because when they acknowledge abortion survivors, then they can acknowledge who the preborn baby truly is, right?
Yes.
And so that's who survivors are, right? We're literally the embodiment of every preborn child who is at risk of abortion.
Yes. And that's one thing that I admired so much about you and what you said. When I was listening to one of the videos where you were testifying in front of Congress, you said, "Where were my rights?" Because the pro
Mhm.
choice community talks about women's rights all the time. And you were like, "I'm a woman. Where were my rights?" And again, it goes back to what you're saying. If they accept you as an
Right.
abortion survivor, they will have to admit the humanity of the unborn babies. And what has it been like testifying in front of Congress on behalf of abortion survivors?
Yeah, I mean, it is it's terrifying and exhilarating all at the same time. That's the best way I can describe it. I mean, like, I'm the first person to admit the first time I got a phone call in like 2015, I told a congressional staffer, I'm not the person you're looking for. And they're like,
Oh,
I mean, I'm sure they were thinking this is a huge opportunity. But part of it was me also knowing that there were other abortion survivors that needed to be at that table. And one of them was Gianna Jessen, because this was a hearing about Planned Parenthood. She survived a Planned Parenthood. And so I will never forget that. I'm so grateful that she and I were able to testify together that first time about defunding Planned Parenthood. But that was probably the most contentious hearing in reality. I mean, I've been through the ringer in some, um, but it was lengthy, and it's demeaning, for lack of
mm-hmm,
demeaning is a good word. I think dehumanizing is a really good word. So they dehumanized us through abortion,
mm-hmm,
and they dehumanize us still today. I think the last time I testified was 2 years ago in a hearing that the Democrats had called, and it was called something like the nightmare of abortion bans. Okay, we all
mm,
know they weren't looking for us to be friendly. And the only thing they said to me in that hearing, Amelia, they passed a sheet from one staffer to one of the Democrats in the hearing, and their statement was saline infusion abortions aren't performed routinely anymore.
hmm. So
Talk
that was
about
their
dehumanizing.
justification.
Absolutely. Like, this witness is irrelevant to this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
And yet we would be criticized and called out time and time again, right? We're supposedly the people who don't care about women. We
Mm-hmm.
don't care about babies after birth. We're the ones who are supposedly dehumanizing, yet they are the ones who wrote the playbook.
That's so awful. And I'm sure there were protesters outside while you were testifying or at other events. And if you really think about it, which I'm sure you have many times, they're protesting your very existence.
Absolutely. And that's, I think it has become something that motivates me, right? I don't suggest this to families with abortion survivors, right, who are really young, of like, oh yeah, this is right. It takes a lot of discernment and a lot of healing and a lot of growth to get to the
Hmm.
place where you can take that on. I was recently in Canada speaking at a march, and the protesters were very loud. And they were, throughout the time that I was speaking, saying things like, that doesn't happen, right? As loud as they can on their speakers. And again, right, it's really, you could take that personally, and I don't, obviously, because I
Right,
wouldn't survive this if I did. But I know that it's not about me, right? It is about abortion. It is about their stance on abortion, their inability to accept the reality, because the reality, once you face it, you can't unsee this. Like,
right,
this is reality. So
right.
that's, I mean, that's again motivation, right? Of, yeah, I'm not going to shrink back. I'm not going to be afraid to be who God created me to be, because the world needs to see and hear and know.
And that's so amazing. And like you said, it doesn't fit their agenda. They're the
Right.
same ones that say follow the science, yet every time they are confronted with science, they basically tell you that you are foolish, that you are disseminating misinformation. They are not pro science at all.
Absolutely. And, I think you and I could probably also say they show themselves to be not pro woman either.
Hmm.
They're pro some women, right? And I mean, there was a book that came out recently, and the author's name is Sarah Rudin. And I can't remember the exact title of this book, but essentially it's like a history of the wrongs, right, against women. She's pointing it at the conservative and pro-life movement. And she actually included, she said, the Abortion Survivors Network by name. And she was criticizing what we do and who we are, saying that we essentially, right, are just like, we're phony. We're creating this pyramid scheme based off of, to get people's trust, and then use them as these like political figures. I mean, like, this is me putting it nicely. It was a real bang up job. And what I was taking away from that is like, believe all women except the ones that are pro life. And I actually said to a member of the press who wanted a statement, I said, I wonder if she would believe the story of an abortion survivor who is actually like pro choice. Would she
Right.
believe that they survived an abortion? Because I think she would, which shows her cards, which is, it's not about being an abortion survivor at all. It's about whether or not you're pro choice. Like, that's their litmus test.
Yes, absolutely. So, did you always take it so well and you find confidence in your story and sharing it with others? Or was there a time it was a real struggle for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I didn't, I think my family would say I've always been an advocate, right? I'm a fighter. I'm always like rooting for the underdog, taking care of the underdog. But yeah, when I first found out my story at the age of 14, it was incredibly um, traumatic. I mean, I think that word is overused in our world, but I can tell you, when you find out that somebody had tried to end your life in an
Hmm.
abortion, and you find out, yeah, it's traumatic. And I think the greater pain for me, and I see this in our survivors that we serve in our world today, is, there's this trauma that comes from living in a culture that props abortion up to be this
Hmm.
right and this thing to champion, because we live with the wounds of it every day, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual. And it does impact your identity, right? Because you're looking at yourself and going, well, I mean, if that is the thing that people are supporting, what does that mean about me? Is there space for me in this world?
Hmm.
Is there space for my voice? And so that was a huge part of my journey to becoming who I am, which was, having to wrestle with the truth that, you know what, I am not an accident. I am not unworthy. I have a place in this world, and I don't need to be ashamed. I don't need to be afraid of who God created me to be. And, I think there's something really beautiful as well when we find other people like us. And I think that's a huge missing piece of the puzzle historically for my population, right? We kind of
Hmm.
would find each other by accident. And it was kind of like you're me too. And it's like, what? No way. We shouldn't have to like have a secret handshake, right? We don't have to
Right.
tell everybody all our stuff, but we also shouldn't be afraid
Hmm.
of who we are. And so yeah,
Hmm.
it's been, you know, over 30 years of this journey. And, I think the other part that has built me up to being who I am is just following God and not being afraid. And I mean, there's something really, really powerful of being obedient and the boldness that comes along with it.
Yes, that's so inspirational. And when I was looking at your website before this episode, and I read your bio on the Abortion Survivors Network website, you said something on there that was so beautiful. You said, I don't believe God originally wrote abortion into my life, as God is the creator of life, but when it was introduced by man, or in my case, a woman, he rewrote the story of my life around it to create the story of a life that is more intricate, more redemptive, more grace filled than anything anyone else could have planned or written. That is absolutely
Hmm.
so beautiful. And, it's true. God didn't create abortion and he didn't want
Right.
that for you, but out of the free will of man, they made abortion and he used it. Just like in Joseph's life in the Bible, God didn't want his brothers to throw him in a pit and sell him into slavery, but he used it. And later on, he said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And he used it to save his family and his nation from a famine.
Absolutely. And I hope that's an encouragement to other people. I think,
Yes.
whether it's abortion or anything else, we're looking at it and going, God, why? Right? Why? How could this be? This is not who I know you to be. And in reality, when people will go, well, where is your God?
Mm-hmm.
Mm, this was not God's will, right? This
Right.
is free will. And, I think one of the most beautiful things for me is seeing how, I could have had and I did, right? I had all these ideas and these plans about what my life was going to look like, whether it was professionally or even with my biological family.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you what, like, I couldn't have asked for anything better than what I
Mm-hmm.
have. I couldn't have dreamed of anything better. And I hope that encourages people. We don't know what God's timetable looks like, but when you are patient, you watch it unfold, and it's incredible.
Amen. That's beautiful. And that's just a testament to God's redemption, how he can bring beauty out of ashes. So, when you found out that you had survived an abortion, you said you were 14 years old. How did that come about that you found out?
Yeah, every people have a lot of questions about abortion survivors, like how does it happen and how do you find out? And that's a whole episode. Um, in my case, I was placed for adoption after I had survived that abortion. The doctors were not sure how long I might live or how many disabilities I might have. That abortion was performed believing my birth mother was probably about 18 to 20 weeks pregnant, but the abortionist hadn't performed any kind of adequate exam. So, in
Mm-hmm.
reality, when I was born alive and weighed nearly 3 pounds, they started to realize she was probably close to like almost 8 months pregnant with me.
Wow.
And so I went home to my adoptive family about 3 months after the abortion survival. And so grew up knowing I was adopted. My parents did a really phenomenal job as parents, uh, equating adoption with love in our family.
Yes.
It wasn't a thing of loss. It wasn't a question of my self worth or my identity. It was simply the fabric of our family. And so when I was 14, I mean, that was kind of the traumatic, shocking thing to find out I had survived an abortion, because, right, that was not part of the story that I knew. And
Right.
because I found out through my older sister facing an unplanned pregnancy. And
Mm,
so she, was not sure about what she was going to do about that pregnancy. And so that's why my parents finally broke their silence on this big family secret. And ultimately, my sister got to me with that news quicker than my parents could. And,
mm,
looking back on it, no, this isn't how I want anybody to find out their story. But I also see the hand of God in it, because I don't think there was going to be a point in time that my parents went, this seems like it's a good time to have this
right.
conversation. I mean, that just wasn't going to happen. And so, yeah, it was traumatic, but like that's part of God's redemption story that he's still writing, because now at the Abortion Survivors Network, we get to work with families like mine, starting whenever they want to, giving them resources and tools, including children's books that I just have coming out. One's called Always You for young abortion survivors, and one
That's
called
awesome.
Always Us for their siblings, so that families, and not just adoptive families like my own, but the biological moms and dads who are raising their kids after failed abortions, they could start having a conversation about this. And so it doesn't have to be this, oh my gosh, how do we ever deal with this? No, this becomes a conversation that we have proactively in our family. It is okay to talk about these things. Your identity can be a positive one, because you are not at fault in this. And so that's a
Right.
lot of the messages in it. And I'm grateful. I mean, if I could go back to my 14-year-old self and say, this moment in time, right, is going to change everything for you. But because it changes everything for you, you then can help change it for everyone else. Like
Yes.
that, I want that for other people.
That's so incredible. So, how has God used it? Tell us about you starting the Abortion Survivors Network and kind of the journey to that.
Yeah, back then when I found out my story, I did not know that abortions could fail. I didn't know that other people like me existed.
Hmm.
I can, again, 49, almost 49. That dates me pretty quickly. I didn't have internet until I was almost graduating from high
Right.
school. Um, and I can joke about that now, because that was life changing for me to start looking up on the internet, right? Other people surviving an abortion. So that changed my life. And everywhere I went, when I got involved in the pro life movement, somebody would share their story, and not just abortion survivors, but men and women who were impacted by an abortion and they regretted it. And,
Hmm.
former clinic workers and abortionists who,
Right.
wanted to just talk. And, we found this place of forgiveness mutually across the board. And so, hearing people's stories changes people if we allow it to, right? I mean, therein lies the
Yes.
rub of, people who maybe support abortion right now. That's just always my question of like, are you willing to be open to hearing a different story than the
Hmm.
one you know to be true? Because it changed me, and I see it change people every single day through the stories that we share. And so, yeah, the more I heard people's stories, the more it ignited that passion in me that said, right, what else is God calling you to do? And so it was like a wrestling with God for probably almost 7 years of, Lord, show me the people who can help my population, right? Like I know I'd write down ideas of like, okay, here's what I think would help, and send me the people. And then all of a sudden in 2019, when New York lit up pink supporting abortion, and really the world was starting to blow up in a big way about it, more people reached out than ever, adoptive families and abortion survivors. And that's when I realized it had been me all along, that God had called to fill that space. And so formed the Abortion Survivors Network. And, again, talk about things that change you in every good way. I've learned so much, Amelia, in the last, really, I mean, even the last few years since Roe was overturned. to have
Mm-hmm.
women reach out to us right away when their abortions are failing, when they're taking the abortion pill and they don't know if it worked and they want answers
Right.
and they just need help, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're being told, you should just have another abortion, right? The solution to anything you're going through is another abortion.
Right.
And for them to come to us, it is such an honor. And
Yes.
so people have probably noticed that. I mean, I've always been very right. I'm an advocate for women as much as I am for children, but I think people have probably really noticed that within me and within us as an organization is we're saying, hey, no, time out, everybody. Anytime you're talking about even abortion survivors, behind every abortion survivor is the woman
Mm-hmm.
whose abortion didn't go the way that she planned. So back it up and let's
Mm-hmm.
let's hear both of those voices. Let's serve them both. Let's love them well. Let's find out what they need. And so again, that's part of what we've been doing. I have a journal coming out any minute called A Place to Pause, and it is for sidewalk counselors and pregnancy centers and the women that we serve, where women can journal about their abortion that failed, whether it's the abortion pill or any kind of abortion, even their successful abortion pill reversal.
Mm-hmm.
Women are being impacted by that, and we know
Yes.
that. And so if we know that, then what do we do about it? And that's really like that's my everyday mantra is, if I know this, what am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And
And I think
so
you're, oh, I'm
that's
sorry. You go
that's
ahead.
a life-changing thing. Well, I mean, and that's the life-changing thing, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
feeling the urgency.
Yes, absolutely. And you kind of spoke to this a second ago, but so many women are lied to as well. Now we know the ultimate victim of abortion is the baby always. And there are many women who have abortions that know exactly what they're doing. But there are a lot that don't. They've been lied to by the abortion industry. They really think it's just a blob of tissue. They think abortion is a very medical procedure. They don't really
Mm-hmm.
know what they're doing. And our medical field, the abortion industry, and even in many ways our government is doing them a disservice by lying to them. And Senator Josh Hawley a few months ago introduced a bill to ban the abortion pill. And I sincerely hope this passes because there have been so many women that have taken the abortion pill thinking it's a very easy process and they end up getting extremely injured. Some have even
Mm-hmm.
died. Boyfriends or husbands have given it to their wives or girlfriends without their consent and knowledge. I mean, abortion is a very abusive industry, and many women
Mm-hmm.
are being harmed by it as well.
Absolutely. And I don't know how much you paid attention to the Ethics and Public Policy Center studies that came out about this time last year. One of them, of course, was talking about the adverse effects that women were facing after the abortion pill. But the other one that came out was a study that found that in a sample of nearly 900,000 insurance claims that they looked at, 1 in 19 women who took the abortion pill underwent a repeat abortion within 45 days. And
Wow.
Amelia, those were not new pregnancies, right? It was a continuation of
Mm-hmm.
the pregnancy that they already took abortion pills with. So that is a follow-up abortion on the same baby who survived the first attempt. And so
Mm.
for me, right, we saw this immediately when Roe was overturned. And the numbers were just kicking up very, very high, very quickly with the women reaching out to us. And so we were the ones really kind of sounding the alarm saying, hey, we're seeing a pattern here. And so that study affirmed what we saw within these women. But that's really been my kind of clarion call to members of Congress, even and to state legislatures to say, right, not only like, what are we going to do about the abortion pill in and of itself
Mm-hmm.
and the harm that it causes women and children, but if we know this, like it means something in a policy context, even related to born alive infants. So,
Right.
born alive infants, right, when we see them introduce that as a policy, yes, a late term abortion or a second trimester abortion, where the intent is for the child to be delivered dead, right, that is an extremely vulnerable part of our survivor population, right? They are vulnerable and their
Right.
lives should be protected. But I
Yes.
want people to understand this, that there is a much greater issue, which is all of those babies who are surviving even first trimester abortions, say through the abortion pill, and then they're being targeted multiple times when they dare to survive,
Hmm.
right? That's talk about vulnerable. Talk about
Right.
vulnerable. Like, how many times are you going to be targeted for an abortion until you just die, right? I mean, that's literally what it means.
Right.
And the trauma that that causes a woman. And,
Hmm.
what would happen if women were told that their abortion pills could fail, that they're going to continue to be pregnant, that there is still hope for them, that there is hope for their baby, that there is a place like the Abortion Survivors Network that they can turn to for answers and community with other women and the resources that we have. That's the kind of stuff that I think about every day.
Yes. Thank you so much for the work that you do. So, I wanted to specifically talk about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act. I know that that's probably one of the things you were testifying before Congress about. It's a bill they've been trying to pass for years. They've tried to get it passed many times, but it always seems to fail, especially in the Senate. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this is again where people get confused very easily. And I mean, it sounds funny when I go, I have another thing coming out. I mean, literally, it's been my nose to the grindstone. Get it done, get it done. Um, I have a whole blueprint related to Born Alive legislation that has been, on my heart and in my mind for, you know, better part of almost 20 years, watching it not get
Right.
passed. And yes, part of that is a partisan problem, right? We have a partisan problem. But the other part is like I see it as an opportunity to do something even better with it. I see every obstacle as an opportunity. So, in 2002, the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act, right? That is definitions only. That's where people sort of start to get confused as they go, well, it was passed in 2002. No, it was a definitions bill. It just said babies who survive abortions, essentially, right? They're human beings who uh, deserve medical care, and there was no
Hmm.
teeth, there was no consequence. And that's again, like if I could just put that on a sign and wave it every
Right.
single day, going, "There's no consequence. There's no consequence." Because we saw after that cases like Secloria Williams out of Florida, where her baby survived that abortion and was alive. She's the one calling 911, panicking. They put this baby, living, breathing baby, in a biohazard bag and throw them. The abortion clinic did, threw this living, breathing baby on top of the roof of the abortion clinic.
Mm.
We
And that's so
see,
beyond
right?
horrific that that stuff even happens.
Yeah, and then we see the Kermit Gosnells, right, snipping the spinal cords of babies who survive
Mm.
abortions, right? We see Dr. Klopfer, who has a trunk full of aborted babies. We see the five infants in DC who,
Hmm.
people courageously such. People treat this like these are right anomalies, but in reality, people just have turned a blind eye for so long. And so the reality is we have no federal law on born alive infants. We have very patchwork state laws. They are not uniform in terms of reporting. They are not uniform in terms of any kind of consequence. And, if I'm being honest, which I'm sort of known for doing, if I'm being honest, in many ways, we are treated as just this bill that you're going to introduce, knowing that it's not going to pass and getting people to just kind of like, where they stand on the vote. And I
Right.
understand that, right? I understand that in theory, getting people on record, but my population deserves to be treated and that this is a serious issue. If we believe it's a serious issue, then I expect it to be treated as a serious issue. And it
Right.
is, right? These survivors' lives are on the line. And so for me, we can't keep doing the same old thing.
Hmm.
And that's really what my policy blueprint is about, is to say, no, you know what, we've been introducing the same thing for 20 years.
Mm.
We need to talk, we need to message about this differently. We need people to understand what it really means when someone survives an abortion, the different pathways that we get there, that there's continued pregnancy. Women may go weeks or months without knowing they're pregnant, right? How do we serve her well? And
Mm.
then how do we come alongside with quality medical care for baby and mom? And then we are there for them even afterwards, right? Surviving an abortion is one moment in time,
Hmm.
one moment. And in reality, we're talking about like development and then a lifetime.
Hmm. Yes. So you're saying that the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act, the same one that they've been introducing, even the last time they introduced it, was just a definition?
Well, the 2002 was a definitions bill only, right?
Okay.
That's why you see them reintroducing it time and time again, is to introduce a bill that would provide consequence, right, for
Hmm.
failure to provide medical care, and that would also have like really robust reporting in it,
Hmm.
because it's dismal. It is
Yes.
dismal that we don't, first of all, we don't have adequate reporting on abortion, then we don't have adequate reporting on complications and surviving an abortion, right? Abortion failure is quote unquote a complication. I would say it's like an unknown outcome, right? You go into it believing that the outcome is going to be the one thing, and then the outcome is another. Um, so yeah, we see it introduced time and time again, and certainly it has failed time and time again. The last time I was there was back in, is that in 2025? Yeah, it was. Um, January of 2025, and I had other abortion survivors there in the gallery while they were voting. And it's hard for me as a leader to see it fail,
Hmm.
because it sends the message to those that we serve that their experience doesn't matter,
Hmm.
that their pain doesn't matter, that their life doesn't matter. And again, there were some members of Congress who were really disrespectful. And I get it, right? That there are other people running their social media, but there's no place for it.
Right.
And they were being so disrespectful. And I was a little bit witty, but still gracious, and essentially said, right, like, happy to come meet with you. Happy to come meet with you and bring some of these abortion survivors, and also, right, pour through some research with you.
Right.
But they
And
don't.
the fact that this bill could not even pass, that there are
Right.
literally legislators who would say, no, don't give a baby medical care that survives an abortion. That just really tells you where we are as a nation.
Right. And, this is where you hear them say things like, oh, we don't need this bill because it doesn't happen. Well, it does. Okay.
Hmm.
Thousands of times a year. If you want to look through the research with me, happy to pinpoint it. And then they'll say things like, well, there are already laws against infanticide. Well, if you don't have to report, if you don't have to report, how are you going to have any kind of law that catches it?
Hmm. Yeah.
And it is, I mean, trust me, I have been around that block enough times to know how the terminology itself protects them in what they do. And so, I would beg the question, if it's not a problem, then we shouldn't be fighting against it, should we?
Right.
Oh, except, right, we're sort of that sticking point. If you admit that born alive infants happen,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to admit that abortion takes the life of a
Mm-hmm.
preborn baby, right? And so,
Yes. And
yeah,
that's
it
exactly what
is.
it is.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about Kermit Gosnell for a minute because I know you mentioned
Mm,
him a few moments ago. So I remember when I first kind of read about him, I was just so beyond sickened. Like it
mm.
physically made me feel so awful to read these stories. And I'm so glad that he was sent to prison. Um, but I don't think people realize that there are a lot more people just like him
Oh,
that
yeah.
that let babies die or they kill the babies that survive abortions. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the way that that case was even covered said a whole lot, right? Nobody was showing up for that hearing. Nobody was reporting on it. Um, and I part of me looks at that and has a twinge of hope. I know that sounds weird, but if they're unwilling to report it, that tells me that they know how wrong it is, right? This isn't
Right.
like, you don't do a media shutout if you know that it's something that you don't want to have let out in the open. And I sort of feel, again, like that's how abortion survivors are kind of handled in the media, is like, shh, tamper down, right? Don't let them have a voice. Don't let them get involved because, ooh, it could blow the lid off things. Um,
Right.
but yeah, Gosnell was not an outlier. He's just a person who got caught. And he
Hmm.
wouldn't have gotten caught for killing abortion survivors. It was related to other incidents at his clinic. And so
Mm.
the fact that we even know that he did these things is, I mean, purely a God incidence. And
Right.
so,
Definitely.
again, I want people to understand that the problem is much greater in magnitude. And when you look at how policy often collides around born alive infants, it's very clear to see what the playbook looks like. So think New York, think even Minnesota, when they opened abortion to be unregulated, unrestricted, what they did simultaneously is also then strip born alive protection and reporting.
Hmm.
And when you think about that, right, it's like, huh, why would you do that?
Right.
Oh, you would do that because you are allowing abortion through the entire pregnancy. And you
Hmm.
do have the likelihood then of more born alive infants. And oh, goodness, if that happens, you sure as heck don't want to have to deal with them and you don't want to report it. And, I saw that really early on, even before 2010 in Australia. It happened in Victoria. They did the same thing and they, same talking points. Oh, this isn't, it's no matter, right? Abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy, no impact. Oh, yeah, impact, born alive infants in higher numbers. And, right, medical professionals who are talking about how traumatic it is for them. I mean, like, it's right here. It's right
Hmm.
here in front of our faces.
Yes. And there is no difference, and I know you and I know this, but there's no difference between the baby inside the womb and the baby outside the womb. And
Hmm.
so, like we said earlier, if they admit that it's a baby, a human being outside the womb that needs care, they will be basically refuting their own argument because they will have to admit that it's a baby inside the womb too. They
Right.
say, like I said, they're pro science, but yet they think a baby magically becomes a human being the second it's born.
Right.
There's no science
And
behind that.
yeah, and I think that's, talk about things that give me hope, and I'm sure it does give you hope as well. I see younger generations who are like, this is absurd, right? Like,
Hmm.
uh, we know the truth. Why would we say otherwise? So, I mean, I think there's a lot of hope to be found in the next generation. I wish the battle, wasn't the way that it is for them, but yeah, I have great hope that they have truth on their side and they have God on their side. And, um, I think we have stronger numbers than ever of young pro life people who can carry on the work.
I believe so as well. I believe my generation and even those younger than me are starting to wake up to see that we have
Hmm.
been fed so many lies for so many decades that it's obviously not working and not making the world a better place. And so we need something different. That's why so many in my generation are going back to Christ because
Hmm.
we have been given this hopeless life full of despair and godlessness. And so I'm so encouraged to see that as well.
Hmm.
Yes. So earlier you mentioned that obviously you had survived an abortion. Now, if you were in an abortion clinic or a place that did abortions, how were you saved?
Yeah, great question. Again, that's one of the big, like, top five questions for about abortion survivors as well. If you're alive, then it must mean you guys are all okay. Um, and, in reality, this was not the plan in the human terms again for me. So my birth mother's abortion was at a hospital, which is where most late term abortions happen.
Okay.
It's a little different in today's world, depending on the state. You see some abortionists, who profit very highly off of late term abortion. And so
Hmm.
they set up late term abortion clinics in states like Colorado, New Mexico. So, the reality of my birth mother's abortion being in a hospital is what ultimately had a huge impact on my life being sustained because, when I was delivered alive, I was initially laid aside and not immediately provided medical care, but it was just a few short minutes before a nurse was unwilling to just leave me to die and rushed me off to the NICU. And I've testified in hearings, even at the federal level, where Planned Parenthood fought against things like having crash carts in their clinics. Right? They're saying we shouldn't have to have those things. We shouldn't have to have admitting privileges to take a baby to a hospital when they survive. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, right? Okay, show me what you really care about. Um, because in reality, yeah, if that would have been an abortion clinic for me that didn't have the kind of capabilities that hospital would have had, yeah, you and I wouldn't be talking here today because I wouldn't have survived.
Right. And that's another miracle of your story, that it was at a hospital and that there was a nurse that was willing to get you the help you needed. I mean, she was an abortion nurse, correct? Or a nurse helping with the abortion?
I don't know what exactly her role was. It's complicated for
Okay.
nurses, right? Who maybe do or don't want to be a part of an abortion. And certainly, I've heard a lot of stories, including from that hospital, of, the nurses who would say, I don't want to have anything to do with an abortion, or I don't want to work a certain shift because I know that's when you guys are performing abortions. And some of the nurses have even said, like, sometimes they were lied to and told, right, like, oh, this woman is having a miscarriage. And then they find out
Mm,
later that it was an abortion.
mm,
And so, yeah, I will probably never meet that nurse. I think she's probably passed on by now. But I've been connected with other nurses who were there at the hospital. One I'm actually super close to. She was in the NICU working that day when I was brought in. And
mm.
so, I've learned a lot of the secrets that existed in that hospital about my survival. And again, I mean, that's the beauty of this story
Mhm.
is that abortion didn't just impact me and it didn't just impact my birth mom. It impacted the doctor who performed the abortion. It impacted the nurses. It impacted nurses at the next hospital who knew my story. It
Wow.
impacted the people that they told, right? It impacted my biological family on both sides. It affected my adoptive parents. And that's what I want people to remember is that abortion doesn't exist in a vacuum,
Right.
right? It impacts everyone. And if we start acknowledging that it impacts everyone, then it should change the way we think about it.
Yes. Absolutely. It's not just a little decision like where to go to eat. This is a life-changing decision.
Yeah, life ending decision.
Yes, definitely. So, were you ever able to find your birth mother, and do you have any kind of relationship with her?
Yeah, I do. Again, talk about burning questions people have. People have a lot of questions about my birth mother. And, what I have actually found is that on our population, most survivors are actually raised in their biological family after an abortion doesn't go the way that it's planned. And, I think that used to shock people in the pro life movement in particular. They're like, no, wait a minute. How, the baby wasn't the problem.
Mhm.
The baby wasn't the problem. The circumstance was. So we actually have far more raised in their biological family than placed for adoption. But in my case, yeah, found out when I was 14 about the abortion survival. Started looking for my birth parents when I was 19. Didn't find them until I was almost 30,
Wow.
and there were a lot of secrets that prevented her from getting to me and me getting to her.
Mhm.
And that great big secret, Amelia, that I found out when I was about 37 was that she had spent over 30 years believing the abortion had been successful.
Wow, so
She
she
was
didn't even
told,
know that you had survived.
right, she did not know.
Wow.
She was told that it had worked. And it was sort of like in my life I'll find out one little thing and then something else happens that kind of
Mhm.
like confirms something. And I mean, without doubt, that's I always have kind of this streak of it happening. And it happened even related to that because um I learned in talking to the nurse Jan, who I have a relationship with, that when my when the nurse rushed me to the NICU, my grandmother, who my maternal grandmother, who was a nurse there at that hospital and was behind the forced abortion, she followed the nurse in and told the other nurses to never tell my birth mother Ruth that I had survived. So, right,
Wow.
it's like this constant confirmation of you're told this thing that almost seems unbelievable, and before you wrestle with it, right, God's going to give you this other piece of evidence to
Hmm.
show you that this indeed happened. And so, yeah, the road to Ruth was a long one, but she is a huge part of our lives. I've had her in my life now for 13 years, but we didn't meet for the first 3 of that. We spent about 3 years communicating and really establishing trust, and really it was important for me more than anything that she trusted me more than me trusting her,
Hmm.
because I needed her to know that she's loved and she's forgiven, and
Hmm.
she is a huge part of our lives. One of my daughters just graduated from high school recently, and I mean, there's a million God stories in there, but Ruth was there at the graduation. She was with my adoptive parents, my mom and dad, and then in came a member of my biological father's family. So he
Wow.
passed away before I ever could meet him, and it's
Mm.
complicated because of his passing and his family not knowing anything about me. But
Mm.
I, it was amazing to see this 91-year-old member of my birth father's family and be able to say to her, "Hey, that's Ruth over there."
Oh, that's
Crazy
so
stuff, God
wonderful.
stuff. Yeah, just crazy God stuff.
That's so wonderful. And again, the redemption of the Lord bringing beauty out of ashes. I just love your story so much. Thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing your story today. You are doing such amazing work. I always want to leave my audience with something that gives them hope, because sometimes this
Mm.
world can be extremely heavy and, we can get weary in well doing. What is one thing that gives you hope and that could give the audience hope?
That's a great question, Amelia. This sounds so trite to say. Every single week we are contacted by families impacted by an abortion that failed, or they stopped it, or they reversed it. So we're talking thousands of lives a year. And that is my greatest source of hope, is seeing that against all odds, right? Life has prevailed time and time
Mhm.
again. And that's what I want your audience to leave with, is realizing that if a child can survive an abortion,
Yes.
there is nothing that God can't do for them.
Amen.
Nothing.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Tell us where we can find you on social media, how people can connect you to your organization.
Absolutely. So our website is abortionsurvivors.org. We also have a speakers bureau, Real Abortion Stories, where we send survivors and moms and adoptive families to speak, because telling stories is a huge part of bringing hope and healing and also awareness to people. So realabortionstories.com. For our social media handles, we are at the_abortion_survivors network. And my particular handle is at Melissa Ohden, Ohden, on all the platforms.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining me today. I know that a lot of people are going to be impacted by your story.
Thank you.